Hi, welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson right here, Psalms. This week we're studying from lesson number 4, which has the title, The Lord Hears and Delivers, and today is Thursday's lesson, which has the title, Help from the Sanctuary. If you observe here the initial portion of the lesson, you'll see that there are several verses that are mentioned that have to do with today's lesson. Today's lesson has to do with the help that comes from the sanctuary. Throughout the whole Bible, especially in the Old Testament, you'll see that the sanctuary is God's headquarters. It is from there that God rules over the universe. More than just a tent in the desert or a building built by human hands, God's sanctuary up in heaven is revealed to be from where God operates. His throne is there. Myriads of angels serve before him and carry out his orders from that location. The Bible speaks a lot about the heavenly sanctuary, which is this place. And so if you have more desire to learn about this, I encourage you to open a Bible dictionary, open a biblical encyclopedia, look for sermons, look for lectures about this very topic. In my opinion, the doctrine of the sanctuary is the most important of the biblical doctrines, simply because every other biblical doctrine converges on this understanding of a sanctuary up in heaven, from where God operates. So if you want to learn about salvation, if you want to learn about sin, if you want to learn about atonement, if you want to learn about death, about the resurrection, about Jesus' second coming, about his work of intercession for us today, all of this is found in the motif of the sanctuary. But for our purposes here today, the sanctuary is from where our help comes. Look at what the lesson has to say about that in the first paragraph. The motif of the spiritual and physical refuge and help notably appears in the context of the sanctuary. The sanctuary is a place of help, of safety, and of salvation. The sanctuary provides a shelter to the troubled. God defends the orphans and widows and gives strength to his people from his sanctuary. When out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God will shine forth, God's righteous judgments are proclaimed, and the Lord's blessing goes forth. The refuge in the sanctuary surpasses the security provided by any other place in the world because God personally dwells in the sanctuary. The presence of God, not merely the temple as a firm building, provides safety. Likewise, being the mountain where the Lord dwells, Mount Zion surpasses other mountains, though in itself it is a modest hill. One story of the Bible that I always remember when thinking about this topic is the story that we find in 2 Kings chapter 18 and 19, which is the story of Hezekiah and Sennacherib. The story tells us that the fearful king of Assyria, King Sennacherib, coming from a very successful campaign against Egypt, arrives in Judah and conquers 46 fortified cities before arriving in Jerusalem. Before he actually arrives in the city, he sends messengers mocking the God of Israel and mocking King Hezekiah, the king of Judah. Now, these conquerors, the Assyrians, they had the fame of skinning people alive, of putting nose rings in their noses and dragging them all the way back to Nineveh, their capital. Nineveh was known as the city of thieves because the population, the people of the city, they themselves would go out and conquer other cities to plunder them and to destroy them. And here I'm not talking about the army, I'm talking about the population. So as you can see, these were extremely violent and aggressive people. And now they turned their wrath toward Jerusalem. Hezekiah initially tries to do something. He tries to pay off Sennacherib, but the more he tries to do things his own way, the worse it gets for him and for his people. Finally, he takes the letters that are brought by these messengers, mocking the God of Israel and mocking him, and he takes it up to the house of the Lord, and he lays these letters out before the Lord, crying out for protection, for mercy, and for deliverance. And that is precisely where God begins acting in the favor of Jerusalem and King Hezekiah. Friends, the truth is that when we go through the scary parts of life, through moments where we don't know what to do, our biblical invitation is to take these letters coming from the enemies of life and to lay them out before the Lord. The lesson then quotes from Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15 and 16 that says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need." This is a beautiful verse of the Bible that tells us that the one that is in heaven right now, in the Holy of Holies, in the heavenly sanctuary, he knows what we are going through. He lived among us. He suffered the same pains that we suffer. He cried our tears. He shed our blood. This is a God. This is a high priest that can relate to you and to me. The lesson proposes a question here, which is, in what ways do these verses parallel what the psalmist says about the sanctuary? And so go back to those initial verses that you read in the beginning and compare that to this text here in Hebrews. What are the points in common between these two portions of texts? The lesson provides an answer in the last paragraph where it says, the holiness of God's sanctuary prompts the psalmist to acknowledge that all people are sinful and completely undeserving of God's favor. And he claims that deliverance is based on God's faithfulness and grace alone. Nothing in us gives us any merit before God. It is only when people stand in a right relationship with God through repentance and acceptance of God's grace and forgiveness that they can plead for God's assurance of deliverance. The sanctuary service represented the salvation found in Jesus. If you want to understand what the sanctuary was all about, just look at what Jesus accomplished in his life, his death, and his resurrection. Everything pointed towards Christ. And so in Jesus, we have the completion, we have the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies and rituals that pointed towards that magnificent event, which was the phenomena of Jesus Christ alive in our world, going through what we go through, so that we could today approach the throne of God boldly. Remember to study your lesson. Look up these Bible verses. It will be a great help for you in your own pilgrimage through this life. Also, comment down below. I love hearing from you. I love reading what you think, your thoughts, your ideas, your questions. That's always an encouragement for me when making these videos. And please remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. We release one every day, and I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.